Then you're not talking about inheriting the Obama economy and what he did there. But look, Obama was the deporter-in-chief. He deported more people. What is specifically, Joe, my turn. Yeah. What specifically is he going to do for deportation? Is he going to get the National Guard?
Billionaire investor and Shark Tank host Mark Cuban has been making the rounds in predominantly right-wing media to defend Vice President Harris and her economic policies. And earlier today, he appeared on CNBC Squawk Box, mostly to spar with a MAGA news host who is so Trump-sympathizing that during this very interview, he tried to defend Trump's actions on January 6th. But during the heated exchange, Cuban was so effective that he stunned this man into silence, and we have to talk about him. But before we do, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. All right, friends, we have several clips to talk about in this video. Mark Cuban is someone who has appeared in videos here at Pondering Politics before because he's a very good debater and he is a very effective surrogate for the Democrats and for Vice President Harris's fiscal policy. And really before Vice President Harris became the presumptive and then the official Democratic nominee, he was also a defender of President Biden's fiscal policy and record as well. So he's very good. He has a lot of credibility in the private sector, in the business sector, because he's a very successful billionaire and he's a very good debater. So he appears on CNBC Squawk Box and he has some pretty heated exchanges with Joe Kernen, who is a MAGA news host who has also appeared in our videos before, because this guy is totally in the bag for Donald Trump. And during the course of the conversation, they cover fiscal policy and even January 6th. So we're going to play these clips and unpack it together.
But to your point, right, what is it? 75% of manufacturers have under 20 employees, right? There's like 4,000 companies that have more than 5 manufacturing companies. Donald Trump is trying to come in with a hammer and say, you're the nail. I'm going to hit you with a 200% tariff, John Deere. Kamala Harris is saying, I'm going to give you incentives to manufacture more. Which do you think is going to work better with companies? Do you want to be underneath a hammer? Because when you put a 200% tariff on John Deere and only a 10 or 20% tariff on their Chinese competitors, their Chinese competitors are now less expensive than John Deere. And it's not so easy. We saw what happened with Carrier, right? When in 2016, they said, you know, if you move down, we're going to tax you more, 35% tariff back then. And what Carrier did, they just gamed the system, right? They just fired different employees.
So again, very effective at what he's doing. Trump did recently threaten to impose a crippling tariff on John Deere. And Mark Cuban makes a really good point here, which is, isn't it interesting how Donald Trump says he was tough on China and will be even tougher on China if he's reelected. But what he's suggesting is he will punish American companies with hitting them with crippling tariffs that are more punitive than the tariffs that he has already imposed on China and intends to pose on China, or claims that he'll impose on China if he becomes president again. Not only is this a ridiculous asymmetry, he's also saying that it's a difference in philosophy in carrots versus sticks, right? Whereas Vice President Harris is trying to offer market incentives for American companies to continue to do business here in the United States and to lower costs. So pretty effective message coming from Mark Cuban. Now we get into some of the spicier exchanges between Cuban and Joe Kernen, this MAGA news host, whom you have seen in previous videos of mine.
So here's the difference, another difference between Kamala and Donald, right? Donald says something and everybody else tries to explain what he really meant, right? He didn't really mean all these things. This is what he's suggesting, right? He's just hyperbole. Listen to what Kamala Harris says. What she says is what she's going to do.
But then you're not going to go back and look at Trump's 4 years compared to the last 4 years that we've had.
But what about the years before
that? We know what he did, and we know there were no hot spots around the world.
Then you're not talking about inheriting the Obama economy and what he did there. But look, Obama was the deporter-in-chief. He deported more people. What is specifically, Joe, my turn. What specifically is he going to do for deportation? Is he going to get the National Guard?
I don't know how he's going to.
You don't think that's important?
No, I just think that when she was unable to answer the question about are you better off now than 4 years ago, I think that was illustrative.
Well, 4 years ago, literally, we're in a pandemic. It was an easy answer.
We can look at exactly what happened. He's already been president. And we can look at what happened when she was vice president. And it's not good, the comparison.
Being the president, Joe, as you know, is different than being vice president. It's not close, right?
So she can take credit for the good things that happened with Biden, but she didn't have anything to do with the bad things.
Donald Trump takes credit for things that didn't even exist, right? The things that didn't even happen. He forgets that we had to pay tens of billions of dollars to farmers because his tariffs backfired. He forgets about all the retaliatory.
The tariffs that are still on.
Well, no, we're talking about farmers' tariffs, right? We're not talking about steel. Today, what did they talk about? They talked about eliminating EV because it's a security threat. That's smart.
They just said 1 minute. We need a bell, like right at the end of the 1 minute.
Yeah, buddy, if he's using a boxing metaphor there, and he got TKO'd in the first round, so I don't know what the hell he's talking about. You don't need a bell. That was a brutal beatdown of Joe Kernen in so many ways. So a couple of things. Number one, Mark Cuban is right, and this is something we complain about on this channel. Everyone on the right likes to pretend that Donald Trump is, number one, a policy wonk and a brilliant communicator. He is not. He is neither of those things. Donald Trump is not, has never been, and never shall be a policy wonk. He has never articulated domestic or foreign policy with any degree of competency or detail, and certainly not off a teleprompter. He just is objectively not. Vice President Harris, Joe Biden, pretty much every elected Democrat are much more educated on domestic and foreign policy than Donald Trump. However, he's graded on a curve. So when Donald Trump is asked questions like, how are you going to reduce childcare costs, or what are you going to do here? And he goes on these incoherent rants replete with non sequiturs and sentence fragments. Joe Kernen and other MAGA Republicans either want you to ignore it or to pretend that it was a beacon of profundity, when in fact it was not. So Mark Cuban was pointing that out, that Donald Trump can't actually answer these questions, and people have to go around behind him and clean things up and say, well, really what Donald Trump meant was this, this, or this. That is the sign that Trump is not, that he is objectively not a very good communicator. He's probably good at insults and branding and communication in other respects, but when it comes to conveying policy, he is objectively terrible. Other things that Mark Cuban pointed out is, you want to talk about Trump's presidency and years and timeline. Donald Trump inherited a recovered economy from President Obama. President Obama spent 2 terms of his presidency, his 2 terms, cleaning up the mess of the previous Republican president, George W. Bush. And by the time President Obama left office, the economy was thrumming. And he passed that off to Donald Trump. Joe Kernen, MAGA Republicans want you to believe that Donald Trump inherited nothing from nobody. Nothing bad, nothing good. It was the Big Bang. And Donald Trump entered the void, and with his own sheer will and orange hands and 2 sticks, he created the United States economy single-handedly. It's bullshit. It's not true. It's a lie to suggest otherwise. He inherited good things, positive macroeconomic trends from President Obama. And those trends continued under Trump's stewardship for 3 out of 4 years, for the most part. So if you want to give him credit for that, that's fine. But objectively, you should also be giving President Obama credit for that as well, unless, of course, you're a dishonest loser, which regrettably Joe Kernen is. You can see, no, I don't want to talk about that. He shrugs it off. But Mark Cuban won't let it go, because this is just how dishonest you have to be a Trump supporter in 2024. Then, of course, during the final year in Trump's office, the whole thing just collapsed on his watch. And then MAGA Republicans don't want you to grade him on that. That doesn't count. But they do want to hold COVID and the implications of COVID stimulus and COVID-related supply chain issues and COVID-related in global inflation. They do want you to hold that against President Biden. Again, it goes down to the gerrymandering of credit, because MAGA Republicans are so dishonest. You can't blame Donald Trump for anything bad that happened on his watch. You can't blame or give credit to any Democrat who gave Donald Trump some good things on which to build. They gerrymander the grading curve just to benefit Donald Trump, and they impose the harshest possible standards on President Biden. Mark Cuban isn't having it, not at all. I love the fact that he's calling this stuff out and addressing it. It's so good. I want to play another clip here as well. 2 more, as a matter of fact. Here's one more.
Either. All we've seen Donald Trump do is hire his relatives, right? RNC, here comes the daughter-in-law. Who's going to speak for him? His 2 sons want to come up with a new Hey, we got a new silver coin. Here come the sons. Hey, we got blockchain. We've got DeFi. Here comes another son. You haven't seen him work with, again, the family business is now the Republican party.
But more,
either.
Again, phenomenal point. People can complain. This is so funny. It just exposed the hypocrisy. So many MAGA Republicans wanted to make a big deal about Hunter Biden and nepotism. This idea that Hunter Biden enjoyed his career in the private sector and owed it to President Biden's last name and political influence. Even if we grant that at face value, even if we grant that there's some sort of Biden-related nepotism, it pales in comparison. Even if I grant you the premise, MAGA Republicans, you still lose the argument, because when it comes to nepotism, the Trump family is objectively worse. And not just in terms of frequency and magnitude, but it also involved the federal government. Donald Trump gave federal government positions, security clearances, intelligence, and benefits to Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, and Ivanka Trump, his daughter. That is nepotism of the highest order, objectively infinitely worse than anything from the Biden family. And these people aren't particularly competent. Ivanka and Jared Kushner have no known experience or expertise in foreign policy or domestic policy. And as a matter of fact, Donald Trump's own intelligence community begged him not to give Jared Kushner security clearance to become a senior White House advisor because of all the outstanding debt that he owed. They thought he was a national security risk because no matter who you are, Republican or Democrat, rich or poor, if you have outstanding debt that our foreign adversaries can exploit to their benefit, they're not going to recommend for you to get a security clearance. And instead, Donald Trump overruled them and gave his son-in-law a cushy government job. He doesn't hire people based on competence. He hires people based on personal loyalty. And I think this is something worth pointing out. I do want to return to a previous clip, though, because there was another point I was trying to make in real time, because Mark Cuban just made so many damn good points. I want to play the last part of it.
He forgets that we had to pay tens of billions of dollars to farmers because his tariffs backfired. He forgets about all the retaliatory.
The tariffs that are still on.
That's right. That's what I wanted to say. So the other point, going back to the second clip I played, Mark Cuban made the point that, when Joe Kernen was like, well, that's not right. The vice president, she gets to take credit for the good stuff under the Biden administration, but we can't blame her for the bad stuff. Well, Donald Trump tries to take credit for things that not only never happened, that not only did happen, but he inherited from President Obama. But he tries to take credit for things right now, even when he's out of office. He has repeatedly tried to take credit for the blockbuster stock market performance under the Biden-Harris administration. He was the one who swore publicly that if Joe Biden were elected president of the United States, we would experience a Great Depression-style crash. That's not happened. The stock market continues to overperform under President Biden and Vice President Harris's stewardship. So it's one of those things that even if we granted you the premise that Vice President Harris is gerrymandering how she should get credit, even if I grant you that, which I don't, Donald Trump is still objectively worse. His record is much worse than he pretends it is. You guys still don't understand the timeline. Joe Kernen talks about what happened 4 years ago. Well, 4 years ago was 2020. We were at the height of COVID under the Trump administration due to his incompetence and mismanagement. Hundreds of thousands of Americans were dying. The economy was in the toilet. Joe, I don't think you understand how time works. So again, I just love the fact that Mark Cuban has an answer for all of this, thus proving the superiority of Vice President Harris over Trump. Now, here's where January 6th comes up, and I think this is also pretty interesting.
And the question is, here we are talking about policy, right? We're having real policy conversation.
The underpinning is the guy
but my question is how much do you think as CEOs who are watching this program, or just a voter, is supposed to think about these other issues?
Look,
I think that Joe would say that January 6th is not something.
It's been litigated. People know it happened. It's been litigated.
But how
the 48% that back him are...
the guy literally told his vice president, he called him, you know what he called him, right? He literally tried to get him to overturn an election. That should disqualify him. It just, for whatever reason, people don't want.
In the heat of that moment, at that point, I think he really did believe that it had been stolen at that point. I don't know if he believes it anymore.
Look, I remember going to...
But you know that in the past, there have been Democrats that have voted not to certify.
Yeah, that's fine.
Many
right,
times.
that's fine. But
previous elections.
None of them called their vice president a pussy and said, don't certify the election, right? None of them have.
Right.
He's the only one to do that.
Yeah. So again, this part, not Mark Cuban's best performance because there's so many other things. Number one, the false equivalence, Joe Kernen. We have had Democratic vice presidents preside over their defeats. Al Gore was the vice president of the United States. He ran against George W. Bush. You could easily make the case that Bush v. Gore stole the election from Vice President Gore. But you know what? You know what Al Gore didn't do? He didn't try to sue his way into the White House. He didn't refuse to certify George W. Bush's victory. He didn't stage an insurrection. Al Gore, in the same position as Mike Pence, could have conspired with President Clinton and the Democrats to throw out the results in his own favor. He didn't. He did the right and honorable thing. Vice President Joe Biden in 2016 didn't conspire with President Obama and Secretary of State Hillary Clinton to steal Donald Trump's victory, right? Instead, they didn't stage an insurrection. They didn't try to sue their way into the White House. They did the right thing, the honorable thing, and committed to a peaceful transfer of power. Vice President Harris is the vice president right now. If she loses to Donald Trump, she will have to certify or preside over the certification of Trump's victory. Are you suggesting that if she thinks the election is stolen, she should try to engage in insurrection or sue her way into the White House or engage in a false fake elector scheme? No, of course not. Joe Kernen would never accept any of this from a Democrat, but he's permissive because it's a Republican. And nothing Democrats have ever done, including object to the certification of Republican victories, ever went far. There were no formal certifications because they couldn't get the co-signatures from their fellow Democratic legislators. This is the false equivalence. Again, Joe Kernen doesn't want to face the fact. What Donald Trump did was uniquely, by orders of magnitude, infinitely worse than anything a Democrat has ever done on the same issue. And he knows it. We're just better than they are. The Democratic Party, in terms of respecting the outcome of elections, and the politicians, we have a better record on this. And Joe Kernen, in his feels, can't handle it. And so he has to say, well, Trump probably believed that the election was stolen. It's not an excuse, sir. It's not an excuse. A lot of Democrats felt that Donald Trump stole the election from Hillary Clinton. It would have been unethical, corrupt, and wrong for Democrats to then engage in insurrection or to engage in a fake elector scheme or anything, try to sue their way into the White House. So they didn't do it. You believing that the election was stolen is irrelevant to our system of government. You have legal mechanisms by which to challenge elections, and when those fail, you need to shut up and accept the results and commit to a peaceful transfer of power. Donald Trump did not do that. Thus, he is inferior to Vice President Kamala Harris, and you will always lose that debate. Great performance by Mark Cuban. You should definitely check out the full interview. And in the meantime, let me know what you think in the comments.